Today on The State of Us, how to reduce homelessness by 63%. One of America's largest cities has done just that. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined of course today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian extraordinaire here at True Chat, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. According to the New York Times, during the last decade, Houston, the nation's fourth most populous city, has moved more than 25,000 homeless people directly into apartments and houses. The overwhelming majority of them have remained housed after 2 years. The number of people deemed homeless in the Houston region has been cut by 63% since 2011, according to the latest numbers from local officials. How did they do this? Was it a miracle, or was it simpler than that? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. What exactly is homelessness? How has Houston dealt with it? And is it truly a national crisis, a national emergency that we ought to be taking more seriously? All of that and more today. But before we dive into it, Lance, do we have a word of the day?
Well, we do. The patency of this topic will hopefully not drive you away from our conversation today. Patency is a 3-syllable word. It is a noun, and it means the state or quality of being obvious. I think all of us, we're well aware that homelessness is an issue in the United States today. And not only is it for the people that fit the functional definition of homelessness, but there are millions of other people that are one disaster, one paycheck, one medical problem away from being homeless as well. Home insecurity is one of the biggest topics today, and none of us want to think about it, because if we do, we stop and realize, oh man, if not for the grace of God, there go I. That very easily could be me or my children or my grandmother or whatever. And so, none of us want to think about these kinds of negatives because they'll pull us down. But we have to.
According to recent estimates by the White House, over 500,000 Americans live in a bureaucratically defined state of homelessness, right? Now, if you go to the measured population, it's less than that, because HUD, or the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, is the agency that, officially has the metrics for this. But keeping in mind, and I think this is a very important what Lance just said, these are the ones that meet, and again, the bureaucratic definition of homelessness. We're not talking about folks who are doing what's known as couch surfing, right? This is very common amongst young people. Rather than living on the street directly, many of them are, in fact, I think what most of us would call homeless, but they're spending a night on somebody's couch or floor from friend to friend to friend to friend because they don't actually have a place that they can stay. So I think that's important as we talk about this, because this what they're tackling in Houston is just that specific population that meets the most drastic, stereotypical definition of homeless, like the person living under the bridge, right? I mean, and literally that's actually part of what's talked about in the story, is that those are some of the people that they're trying to make the biggest headway with. In Houston, what they're doing is talking about chronic homelessness, which is a very interesting term in and of itself, because it's referring to those people, like many across the Houston area, who have been living on the streets for more than a year, or who have been homeless repeatedly, and who have a mental or physical disability. Nationwide, most of those who experience homelessness do not fall into that narrow category. They are homeless for 6 weeks or fewer. 40% have a job. For them, homelessness is an agonizing but temporary condition that they manage to resolve. I think one of the very important things to acknowledge up front is what one of the people leading the effort says, which is that this is not about ending poverty. And you might say, well, wait a minute. Isn't that a big part of homelessness, Lance? I mean, in order to end homelessness, don't you also have to end poverty?
There are a lot of systemic problems here. But what I like in Houston is they're saying, okay, we can't deal necessarily with all of those systemic problems. We're going to get you into a house. We're going to get you into an apartment. We're going to get a roof over your head. And so that you can be reunited with your children, be a family, do those kinds of things. The rest of it, that's not our bailiwick. That's not our intention. That's not our drive. That's a bigger problem than we can solve. And so we just know that you being on the street with your child or without your child, because you are on the street, they won't give you your child. That's not good. So we're just going to focus on this sole problem, and we're going to do the best we can to do that. And then it's up to everybody else to figure out what's causing this and to change that aspect of it, And then there's this side of it, right? For those of you who say, well, you know what? That's their problem. They did something wrong. Something happened to them in life. Just so bad. That's the breaks of the game. Okay. As Houston points out, many of these homeless people call 911 so that they can go to a doctor to get seen for the common cold. All right. And you say, whoa, but hey, those are your tax dollars at work, right? So if you want to save money, get them in someplace, right? Get them started, because then all of a sudden, not only are they out of sight and you're disgusted because, well, you have to drive by them, you have to look at them, or maybe they're in your neighborhood and you don't want them walking down the street while your kids are playing. Okay. They're also spending a lot of tax dollars. All right. And they're taking away from vital programs that your city has that they could be spending on other things. And so even if you don't have any caring bone in your body and all you care about is the bottom line, it's cheaper, it's less expensive for taxes purposes to have these people somewhere living in a home, in an apartment, than it is to be living on the street.
Economists do widely disagree about, the total impact, the total savings to taxpayers of getting people who are homeless off the streets. But if we just look at the ends of the spectrum, Lance, estimates point to significant savings regardless, from $4,800 to more than $60,000 per year per person in supportive housing. So $12,500,000 annually
saved on the low end.
Right.
Right? So even if you're a critic and say, well, this is only saving $5,000 a year per person. Really? You want to, you don't want to save that? And, it's probably not $60,000 a person, which would be a tremendously bigger number. It's probably right somewhere in between, but there's a savings.
Over a decade in Houston, by taking 25,000 people out of homelessness, you on the low end, this is the low end, talk about the high end here in a second. So again, if you just care about the economics of this, on the low end, you're saving $1.25 billion by taking 25,000 people off the street. And then, by the way, and this is, I think, the very important thing here to understand, because the low end is just getting them out of using those emergency services, right, of using programs and not being able to, contribute back to them, whatever it might be. That's where a lot of that initial savings is. That high-end savings, right, comes to, well, now maybe they have a job and they're not using taxpayer dollars to support their housing, but they're paying for their housing and they're paying taxes. And oh my gosh, now what are we talking about? Well, I'm going to tell you what that number is, but you're going to have to wait until we come back here to figure out what the high-end number is. Keep this in mind. 1 in every 14 Americans experiences homelessness at some point in their life. If you are one of those people, or if you know one of those people, hopefully, if you care about this economically, you can care about this also because it affects, a sizable enough portion of our population at some point. The good news is that, most people, right, who end up becoming homeless do get out of it. But we have to ask ourselves, how much money as an economy, as a society, could we be saving if we did a better job faster of getting them out of it? And I think that's a huge part of what we're talking about. Yes, ending chronic homelessness, which is the priority that Houston is most focused on, is incredibly important, but also decreasing and eliminating it where possible. We're going to keep talking about this. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. On the low end, what Houston has done over a decade, will likely save $1.25 billion to local taxpayers. $1.25 billion. That's the low end. What about the high end? $300 million a year, Lance. Or $3 billion over a decade is what it could save you. And that's, remember folks, that's just in Houston.
And we're not talking about the human side of this, right? Of just helping your fellow man. This is a money savings. So for those of you who, that's the important thing in your life, there's the reason why you should be interested in this and finding out what's going on. So let's get into that. What are they doing? Why is Houston the poster child for doing this? Because obviously this is a problem in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, you name it, every major metropolitan, Chicago, every major metropolitan region in the United States has this problem, as well as small town America. And obviously in the smaller towns, we have it as well, but we're not going to save as much money because we don't have as many. But why is Houston having such success when other people aren't?
The questions posed by this New York Times piece, which are sort of the ones we're endeavoring to answer, is if we understood homelessness as a collective disaster, like a fire that is engulfing our communities, how would we want those communities to evolve? Whose examples would we want to follow? Whose mistakes would we want to avoid? What aspects of the system creating and responding to homelessness do we need to see most clearly? So what is the secret sauce for Houston? Well, we talked about 25,000 people in the past decade moved out of homelessness, right? Even judging by more modest metrics, though. Here, listen to this. 10 years ago, homeless veterans, which was one of the categories that the federal government tracks, waited 720 days. Homeless veterans, right? So people who served our country in the military, who are now homeless, which is in and of itself, homelessness, I think we should regard as a society as a crime, but particularly, I think people feel strongly about it. I'm sure our listeners feel strongly about when you talk about veterans who are homeless. 720 days they had to wait. They had to navigate 76 bureaucratic steps to get from the street into permanent housing. 76 different steps. With support from social service counselors, today a streamlined process means that the wait for housing is down to 32 days. So they said, 72 steps and 720 days seems a bit ridiculous.
No, it's more than ridiculous. It's criminal. You're talking about people who have served this country and that's just
720 days.
It's criminal. That's just
720 days was the average wait.
If you're not outraged by that, I don't know what's going. And the thing is, though, folks, that's normal. It's not like that.
Right? No, that's not the exceptional.
Right? That's what these people are facing. Okay.
And even if you measure Houston by the most moderate metrics available, they did more than twice as well as the rest of the country at reducing homelessness over the previous decade. More than twice as well as the rest of the country. So what did they do? Houston has gotten this far by teaming up with county agencies and persuading scores of local providers. That's corporations and charitable nonprofits, organizations that often bicker and compete with one another, to row in unison. Together, they've gone all in on housing first, a practice that is supported by decades of research that moves the most vulnerable people straight from the streets into apartments, not into shelters, and without first requiring them to wean themselves off drugs or complete a 12-step program or find God or find a job. When you're drowning, it doesn't help if your rescuer insists that you learn to swim before you return to shore. You can address your issues once you're on land, or not. Either way, you join the wider population of people battling demons behind closed doors instead of out in the open.
Yeah, the patency of these ideas just blows my mind, right? I mean, we wouldn't, like you said, you wouldn't look at somebody who's drowning and saying, we're going to sign you up for swim lessons. Please fill out this form. And swim lessons are next Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 10 at the local Y. And when you get done with all of that, then you'll be able to swim and save yourself. So that's the way we're going to deal with this. That's the way communities across the United States
being used right now
deal with homelessness. Okay. Well, you have a drug or alcohol problem. You have a mental or physical disability. You don't have a job. You have all of these other things. Well, here's a Bible. Okay. Here's a job application. Here's a 12-step program pamphlet, and, go down the street. And when you complete this program, okay, which is a 6-week program, then we'll worry about getting you a place to live. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's like, and you're like, whoa, but these people have problems and we have to deal with their. Nobody's saying that's not true, right? Nobody's saying, but where's the common sense approach to say, okay, they're homeless. Let's get them a place to live. Then let's address their problem. And I think I was talking to you off air, and we're having a local summit on this in our little tiny county community.
Yeah. Our county of 40,000 people.
Right. Is going to have, a meeting later in a few weeks here, and to talk about this. And I looked at Justin and I said, well, you've been invited to the meeting. I said, you can send me, or just tell them very simply, anybody who can't put their ego aside, if you're coming from, a faith organization or a human services organization or a government entity or a private nonprofit, and you're worried about who gets the credit to help people, please leave this meeting now, because this isn't about people getting your name in the paper or getting your agency more money or more credit. This is about helping our fellow humans, okay? And you need to put your egos aside. And that's what they did in Houston, which is why they're twice as effective.
The mayor said, Lance, and this, because part of the reason, hopefully folks are sensing the passion and the motivation behind what Lance and I are saying is, just for reference, Lance and I are both sitting here in the studio wearing shirts that say Urbana Youth Center. And we work for a nonprofit that's trying to help, those youth who are most vulnerable, right? Is put shortly. And we live this, very similarly. A lot of our students are the ones who are, if our services don't succeed, they're going to become the people that we're talking about in this article, right? That's what you're talking about. So when we share some of this, it's because we're so familiar. And this quote from Miss Parker, who Houston's mayor at the time, she says, different organizations were all working in their own lanes, according to their own rules and procedures, doing what they wanted to do. There might be 100 open shelter beds on a given night designated for mothers with kids, but we didn't have mothers with kids who needed the beds. And
so then the point is the beds went unused.
Right. So you had plenty of people that needed a bed, but because these beds, which great intention, right? I mean, who doesn't want to get mothers with children off of the street and into a bed? We want to do that, right? I mean, we all agree that's a good thing to do. But if there's nobody that meets that criteria and there's 100 empty beds, why aren't we moving 100 people who are sleeping on the street tonight into those beds? And the point is, that's not somebody out there who's being evil or mischievous who said, well, I want to keep my beds, to myself. That's what happens when people do not coordinate and do not work together because they don't know, right? Well, we don't have anybody filling these beds. So, apparently the problem is getting better.
We must be doing pretty well, right? We don't need 100 beds to.
And maybe we are doing well with women who have children who are homeless. Maybe we are doing well with them. We've made a dent. Okay. Well, but that doesn't fix the full scope of the problem, right? So what they did is a White House expert partnered with their city And together, they invited dozens of the city's homeless service providers to a meeting. And we started talking to each other, is how Miss Parker remembers that moment. Sometimes it is as simple as that. They formed a continuum and gave it a name, The Way Home. And the nonprofit Coalition for Homelessness of Houston and Harris County was appointed as the lead agency. But more than 100 local and regional organizations eventually signed up and are part of the coalition today, of the continuum today. So, there was some resistance early on, right? There's organizations that say, it's really important to us that people do X, Y, Z before, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of the organizations in the area said the important thing, right? And that's what Lance said before, is that we help our fellow people. That is the important thing. So do we all agree that we want to get people off the street and we don't want people to be homeless? Yes. Do we all agree about how to do that? No. Can we all agree that we're going to rally behind this philosophy and this approach of housing first, right?
That's
housing
the question.
First.
Right. That's the question.
And what over 100 local and regional organizations did is they said yes. We may not agree that that's the single best approach, but we agree that we will make more headway by all agreeing to approach it the same way rather than say, well, we don't think it's the best approach, so we're just not going to participate. How did the homelessness problem start, though? What's the backstory here? And is it just all better now in Houston? Nothing else to do? Well, there's more to talk about. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. So, Lance, it wouldn't be an episode of The State of Us if we didn't help demonstrate for people the patency of the situation. And in this case, that means take a look at history, because homelessness, by some standards, is a relatively modern American invention.
Well, I'm old enough, I remember when this happened, and this is what the people who were concerned back in the 1970s said would happen when we did this. So this is actually one of those things where people predicted something, and in this case, they were right. The article points out that America has invented modern homelessness. So this exists, folks, because of things we did. And according to the article, here's the story. The stage was set with the shuttering of psychiatric hospitals in the wake of abuse scandals and the introduction of new psychotropic medications. Then cities started offering tax incentives to other people. And basically what we had was, in New York City alone, more than 100,000 people were thrown out onto the street. Substance abusers, elderly singles, former inmates, and mentally ill. Because the government was taking care of them. Our tax dollars were taking care of them. We decided we needed tax savings. That was more important. And so the facilities that were taking care of these people were no longer funded, so they had to close. These people had nowhere to go, so they go live on the streets. Hence, modern homelessness.
Well, and I think a classic case of good intentions leading to unexpected or unanticipated consequences. Because one of the things that happened here, folks, right, is, okay, there's this crime, there's this squalor, there's these issues in big cities, there's this demand for people and businesses to move in. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to create better housing for those middle income people that want it. So how do we do that? Well, if you're in New York City, it's not like there's a lot of new available land to develop. So what do? You have to redevelop old land. So the government develops programs to say, hey, if you're a developer and you want to purchase this rundown, old building and rehab it and turn it into something more desirable, we're going to give you money for that, basically, or we're going to give you tax savings, or we're going to incentivize you to do that. On the surface, that sounds great, right? I mean, well, absolutely. Of course we want to upgrade our city. Of course we want to do this. The unintended consequence that Lance is pointing out is that what wasn't thought through is, well, who is living here what are you going to do with those people? Rehabbing is not necessarily bad, but you can't, or you can. I mean, that's what happened. We did not have a plan for what to do with the people who would no longer be living there. Where will they now live? Well, we don't know. So where did they live? On the street.
Well, and it's not just that, because it was the perfect storm. We're hearing now, right? Inflation, we're all worried about it. And every modern news commentator is saying it hasn't been this bad since, in 4 decades. Okay. In 4 decades? 4 decades ago were the 1980s. And during the 1980s, back-to-back recessions, combined with the Reagan administration's severe federal cutbacks targeting low-income housing and poverty assistance programs, forced more and more Americans, including large numbers of families, into homelessness. At the same time, well-paid manufacturing jobs moved overseas, and steelworkers had to start pushing brooms at McDonald's. Also, there was an oil crisis that drove up fuel prices, which bumped up rents, as did a new generation of gentrifiers discovering the architectural pleasures of historic neighborhoods. So it's not just that we shut down the mental institutions, which is the thing that I remember from 50 years ago, but that was followed up very shortly by bad economic times where we had, and to fix that, we're like, well, we're going to cut taxes because that'll put more money into people's pockets, which it does if you have a job. But at the same time, companies went overseas and manufacturing jobs were lost in the United States, which put more people out of work or being underemployed. That is, they're working at jobs that pay less because there aren't jobs that pay more available, which then put families at risk. Many of the Reagan era tax reforms, and I'm not bashing on President Reagan, these are just the things that were done, okay? Well, he wanted to build more high-end single-family homes, not more apartments, which is great because home building is an economic multiplier. When homes are built, jobs are created in many, many, many industries, okay? That's what we mean by an economic multiplier. You just don't build the home, but you have to, it's not the lumber company, then it's the roofers, and it's the plumbers, and then you put the carpet in, and then you buy the furniture. And so, it really helps the economy, and that's what President Reagan was doing. But the problem was that in 1985, over 500,000 apartments were built in America. But 6 years later, 1991, we only built 140,000 apartment buildings. So now there's less apartments available. So if you didn't have
more people, less apartments,
which there's the economics, right? People began to compete for fewer and fewer apartments. And the affordable housing market turned into a game of musical chairs played by low-income Americans. And somebody always loses, right? If you remember playing musical chairs at the birthday party, every time they pull a chair, somebody else loses. You're guaranteed a loser, right? You're playing for a winner. You get your winner, but everybody else lost. And that's what happened in the housing industry in America. That's how we created this situation that we're in. As Justin pointed out, good intentions improve the economy, improve the life for many, many people. But then there's this whole segment of society that had the rug pulled out from under them. That all of a sudden, their job was taken away, fuel prices went up, they got a job, they were trying to make ends meet, but then there were fewer apartments available for them to live in. So now, law of supply and demand, apartment owners can now raise the rent because there are more people looking for an apartment. And if you were the loser, you have no place to go.
And hopefully you've gotten the picture that one of the reasons this is so important is what I wrote down, Lance, when we talked about that before, because this is a term that we use frequently at the youth center, is meet people where they are, right? Meet people where they are, because it's so easy to accidentally, and again, most of these people that are trying to work on this stuff are really good people, very kind-hearted, and they're trying to solve a very serious problem, right? So as two people that work at this and know many people that work at this, very sympathetic to the struggle of it. I don't think there are very few people working in this field because they have bad intentions, right? Very, very few. So I think that's a huge, very important thing to make sure that we drive home, is that most people are not out there trying to hurt or trying to make homelessness worse, right? They're trying to do things that they think will make the world better. And usually what happens is somebody gets the butt end of this. And unfortunately, that often results in people becoming homeless, So the point now is, well, what do you do about that? Well, meeting people where they are, again, the research supports that is the very sensible first step. That drowning thing I really think it drives home. If we told you, right, that you see a small child drowning in the city pool, I don't think that if you lined up 100 Americans, that any of them would say that the thing that we ought to do while the child is drowning is call out to them, you need to get swim lessons. What would you do? You or the lifeguard would dive into the pool and lift them out of it, right? And say, are you okay? Make sure that you have what you need, get you medical attention if that's necessary. And then we would say, let's make sure we get you swim lessons so that this doesn't happen again. But we would not start with swim lessons. And that is, I think, hopefully what we've tried to do in this first piece of this two-part segment is explain why this approach, it's not a fix-all, right? Taking somebody and putting them in a house.
We're not trying to solve poverty or racism or any systemic problem. We're just trying to get people a place to live.
Yeah, because in order to do what Lance and I are interested in doing, and that's kind of, I think, what we're going to talk about in the next episode is, let's embrace housing first. If we do that, what's next, right? Because we're big on, and I think our listeners know this, how do we address the problem holistically? This is important because it's the first step, and you have a city that's demonstrated by taking a unified first step, we can make very sizable progress that, by the way, has a clear economic advantage.
And can you really address the other problems if you don't take care of the basic problem first?
Right.
Which is the swimmer, right?
And I think
if you don't save the swimmer, you can't get them swim lessons. If you don't give somebody a home, a place to live, you can't get them a job. You can't solve their dependencies. You've got to do the number one. It's so simple, right?
Yeah.
It's so, the patency is just, it's right there in front of your face. You have to get them a home first, then you can work on the other issues.
It's just like at the youth center, we talk about, well, we need to get these kids to do homework. Well, how do we do that? Well, if they're hungry, it's really hard to get them to focus on doing homework, right? And most of you, if you know children, right? Yeah, it is really hard to get a kid to focus when they're hungry. I mean, I don't know about you, but not just children, adults. Boy, it's really hard to focus if you're really hungry.
Well, the whole concept, right, way back in the day was the kids came home from school and there was somebody that met them at home with milk and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or milk and cookies. Why? Because they were hungry, right? So they had just come from school. They'd eaten lunch 4 or 5 hours earlier. And the first thing you did when they walked in the door was, and then when mothers went back to work, there were things in the refrigerator that mom had made before she went to work so the kids could open the refrigerator and get something to eat and then sit down and start their homework. This is a concept that I grew up with in that America, 50, 60 years ago, that the first thing you did when you got home from school is your mom or whoever your caregivers were supplied you with a snack. And then you could go play or do your homework. And now that's what we're doing here locally at the youth center. At your point, give them something to eat, then you can talk about doing your homework and doing the things that you need to do to be successful.
It's a relatively straightforward concept, but I think it's very important because so often those of us trying to help want to fix it all, right? I mean, that's what we all want, right? So we want to take this person that's homeless and say, let's get you a home and let's get you a job and let's get you, better clothing and furniture and you make your rent payments and you have your job and you're in control of your life. That's what we want for you, right? That's what we want. So sometimes the problem is we try to back into that the wrong way, which is to start with, well, if we can get you a job, then you can afford a place to live. But how many people are going to hire you if you smell bad and have one pair of clothes?
Well,
and that's a terrible thing to say, but it's true, is it not? I mean,
maybe
is
you've
it
never
not
stopped
true?
to think about it. What's the right there in the first few boxes, what do you ask for when you fill out a job application? What's your address?
I don't have one.
Can't get a job.
Yep. What bank account are we depositing money into? Well, I don't have one.
I don't have one.
Right. Well, how am I going to get to that? Well, I don't have a car. I mean, so where do we start?
So many of us take that for granted, right?
Right.
I mean, when I fill out a job application, it's like, oh yeah, I've got an address.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got a phone number.
Yep.
Oh, I have a bank account. I have a car.
Right. These are all the things I have.
Yeah.
But what if you don't have those things? Where do you begin?
Right. How do you get that? He said, well, these people need to have a job. Can't get a job because you don't have an address. It's that simple.
The illustrated part of just how bad the system is that the old system had a lottery, Lance, every 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years, where people could sign up, right? For a random lottery to get federal housing vouchers. Every 4 or 5 years is when you could sign up for this. Of course, in order to sign up, guess what you needed to list? A mailing address. You're homeless, and to get a voucher, to maybe get a voucher every 4 or 5 years.
To fill out the application for a chance at a voucher, you needed a mailing address.
Because the way they're going to notify you is by mail.
That makes sense to me.
Sure. Well, hopefully we've given people something to think about. But again, this is just part one, because the next thing that we want to talk about, and we hope that you're going to check out that episode as well.
There is a good ending to this story. So you need to listen to the second part. You need to listen to part 2 because there is a good ending. We've painted a very bleak picture, but there was, and there is, good things going on.
Well, and I think the very positive thing today is talking about just this one step of moving in the right direction, 63% reduction in homelessness in a decade. That's tremendous. Atlanta's following suit now. Some other big cities are thinking about maybe doing the same thing. But what are the problems with ending homelessness beyond taking this first step? And what are the very real ways that we can take those next steps? Well, that's what we'll talk about in the next part. But why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission. And our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And hopefully you've enjoyed today's conversation and you'll tune in again. Tell your family and friends about us, and they say, well, that sounds like something that I would be interested in, and tell them as a podcast. They can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available, releasing new episodes Tuesdays and Thursday mornings as a podcast. Those same episodes can be heard on the weekends on select AM and FM talk radio stations around the country. Lance takes the win today for the word of the day. And don't forget, there's a second part coming on this. So please, please, please be sure to check it out, because the second part is as important as the first part. But much like what the article lays out, Lance, we're trying to do the first thing first, right? Do the first thing first. Now we're going to talk about what comes after the first thing. For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.